We'd like to invite our listeners to attend our annual benefit dinner for the Doc Booth Foundation on April 12th at 6 p.m. at the Dixie Convention Center. This year, we're honoring the great Mary Esther Staley Putnam, who has been a pillar in this community. If you can attend or would like to donate, you can buy tickets at docboothfoundation.org.
You can't talk about Santa Clara and childhood without talking about the ability to walk through the town on a Sunday and be invited to all the homes that had made peach pies, homemade ice cream. It didn't matter who you were or where you were. As you were walking up, they would just invite you in. And the smell of peaches throughout the whole town in the summer, I don't think I'll ever forget that.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a weekly podcast sharing the stories of a place known as Utah's Dixie, and brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation. Through stories as universal as they are personal, this podcast is dedicated to the memory of legendary family physician Dr. Craig Booth and to defining, preserving, and perpetuating the spirit of Dixie embodied in his life and work.
Hi, I'm Lyman, host of the Not Forgotten podcast. For more than 40 years, I've been writing and publishing with the intent of connecting landscape and story in the American Southwest. I believe the words spoken by a character in a story by Barry Lopez. Everything is held together by stories, he said. That is all that is holding us together, stories and compassion. Dr. Craig Booth was a man of stories and compassion. His personal story is one of the many that have made Utah's Dixie what it is, and his compassion is at the heart of that elusive entity we call the Dixie spirit. It's really fun to continue our conversation with Sherrie Anderson and Claudia West and Paul Graf. And as we talked in the last episode about Santa Clara and what makes Santa Clara, going back through the history, I thought it would be really fun to talk to these three about growing up in Santa Clara and the uniqueness of that. And I know that Sherrie technically grew up in St. George, but her connections in Santa Clara are deep and long. So I think she can speak with authority there. However, what I want to emphasize is that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of folks who are from this generation or these 2 or 3 generations who could be sitting here with us telling these stories. And I wish that we could have everyone together. But I also feel blessed that I have these three because I think they represent those dozens and dozens of people in a beautiful way. Not to put pressure on you, but you are representing a lot of folks, the three of you, and I just think it's so fun to look back and think about the unique aspects of growing up in Santa Clara. I grew up on 600 South in St. George, and I thought that was the greatest, most idyllic opportunity or place or experience. But right across the street, John MacArthur lived there, and his mom, Lorna Graf MacArthur, every Sunday they would go to Clara, and that's what he called it, was Clara or Clary. And then he would come back and he would tell me all the awesome things they did in Clary, and I was jealous. And I realized that I missed that by a couple of generations because my grandfather grew up in Santa Clara, but then he raised his family on Tabernacle Street in St. George, and my dad raised his family on 600 South. So I'm looking at the three of you, and I want you to tell me what I missed not growing up in Santa Clara. Claudia, will you get us started?
I'd love to. I think going to school, our schoolhouse, was so unique. We had from first to sixth grade, we had 3 teachers. They would each teach 2 classes. Now I had, in the first and second, I had Mrs. Cannon. And third and fourth, Mrs. Larson. And then I had fifth and sixth, I had Arlo Hafen. And I know Claude Fry was also there because my older siblings had him. But Santa Clara, the school, May Day, the May Day celebration, the whole town would come together. The girls were all excited because we always got a new summer outfit, a T-shirt and shorts. I don't know what the boys did, but I know what us girls did. And the races and all the challenges, that the competition was and probably is really big in Santa Clara. In each grade, they could tell you who was the fastest runner, who could play baseball the best, who could play all that. Well, the other thing is just all of the playground equipment. There's so many stories about the playground equipment, but we just had so much fun. But the girls, our biggest thing is we couldn't wait till we were in the 6th grade so we could braid the maypole. I mean, that was a big deal because they would give you a certain color of ribbon, and then you would go home and your mother would make you a dress or a skirt to match that ribbon. Now, you couldn't just have a ribbon. You had to take it home. It had to be starched. It had to be taken care of. And then the boys, the 6th grade boys, they loved it because they got to stand in the middle and hold the pole. So May Day celebration was a big deal. It really was. So
does that harken back to Switzerland?
It's European.
Mm-hmm.
European.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
May Day and the maypole.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I talk about it all the time to my kids. That even when our kids were growing up in Santa Clara, they still had May Day at the schools, and they still braided the maypole and did all that.
Yes.
And I don't know at what point it went away, but sadly it's gone away. But we still make it a point. We've had maypoles made, and we take them to the Santa Clara Elementary and the Arrowhead Elementary every year, and the 5th graders there learn how to braid the maypole.
Bless your hearts. That is so awesome.
That's fun.
Paul, what comes to mind
when you mentioned the school? The first day of school was always, you remember the linseed oil smell when you'd
yes.
walk in, and that just, the new paint and the linseed oil on the floors. And I love those thoughts, those memories. I lived right across the street from the school, okay? And so I could wait until the last minute to get to school. And usually I did. There were 2 bells, right? One to tell you had so many minutes, and then the other one to tell you it's time. And I'd hear the first one and still putter a little bit, then run across the street. We lived in that house for the first 13 years of my life anyway. And that was a great place to live, right across from the school and the church. We, like most other families, had a barn with a cow and a horse or 2 and maybe 2 cows. And I got to do chores early mornings and late nights and milk the cow. And one of my assignments was to make sure we had wood for the fireplace because that was our only source of heat. So I had to get the wood, I had to chop it, I had to get it to the house, and I had to have it where it would be dry when we needed it and take it in and put it by the fireplace if it was time to use it. And you guys probably didn't have to worry about that. I remember one year, my sister and I liked cats. I know when my family hears this, they're all going to say, "What?" But we did. We enjoyed playing with cats and dogs. We had those kind of animals as well. And a spark popped out of the fireplace. We must have had a pine knot in there and hit that cat. And its fur went, and the cat jumped and went right up through the fireplace and up the chimney. And that's the first time I realized that chimney was an open chimney. We went outside, got a ladder, leaned it against the house, and climbed up on the roof to get that cat off the top of the chimney. And it had gathered enough carbon going up through that its fur was just glowing. It looked like it had sparklers all through it.
It's a good story.
That was a new one for me. I'd never seen anything quite like that. But, we enjoyed animals. We enjoyed having those kind of things around. And I don't know where Sherrie got her photos, but a lot of photos of me in the museum or when I was in diapers. And there's one where I remember, actually in my mind, I remember my dad trying to put me in the ditch and my feet coming right up to my chest because that water was cold and I didn't want to get too wet.
I think water was the lifeblood, and I always loved it when water would run through the ditches in town. That was just such a tempting thing to go play in the ditches and
we did.
And to float down them and just, on those hot summer days, that was just a great thing to play in those ditches.
I've never been a very good swimmer because the deepest water I've ever been in until I was about 14 was up to my waist because that's how deep the irrigation ditches were. I remember when I was about that age, my dad and I were irrigating in Ivans, and we had a pond that we would store the water in. It would run down the ditch and into the pond, and then when we got enough, we would go up and irrigate our field and do it on our timetable instead of the ditch's timetable. And Dad said, "Hey, we've got a few minutes. Let's go swimming." And he stripped right off and went running out and dived in, and I was speechless. I'd never seen him swim before, and I don't know why I hadn't thought about it, because he was in the Navy. And yet he was, swimming around, and so I jumped in, and after my third time going down, this arm pulled me out and said, "I thought you knew how to swim." I said, "I thought I did too."
Well, you grew up in the desert where there wasn't deep enough water to learn how to swim.
That's right.
And you had the boys' pond.
Well, yeah, and
It was to your waist, too.
And dirty.
So the boys' pond, that's an interesting statement. There was a boys' pond on the south side of the creek and a girls' pond on the north side, and both of those ponds were created because the sand that was brought down the river, as it was diverted from the river, it would go in and fill the irrigation ditches, and so they had a sluice gate that could be opened, and that sand would be taken back into the river bottom and out of the irrigation ditches. When the Gunlock Reservoir was built, in about 1965, 66, right through there, that sand stopped coming down the river. And it changed the whole nature of the river bottom in Santa Clara, at least, because up until then, it had really been more like a beach. And it was a lot of fun to go play in there. And I spent hours and hours and hours down on that beach with a little trickle of water coming down.
And that golden age of the boys' pond was 40s, 50s, probably.
Yeah.
And into the 60s.
Yeah, and into the 60s, yeah.
And I know we could talk about boys' pond. We could get a bunch of boys and talk about boys' pond for a long time.
I remember one of my earliest memory of the boys' pond was when some girls, we were on the south side of the river, and some girls, I could name them, Donna and Shirley and Mary. Anyway, they came over and saw all of our clothes on the bushes, and so they just gathered them up. Of course, we couldn't get out to stop them. I wasn't old enough to worry about it anyway, but I was there with some older boys, my brother Jan and some his age, and there's nothing we could do but watch them walk down the trail with those clothes, and they'd throw them over their shoulders as they would walk, and knowing that we were going to have to figure out a way to get out and get those clothes later on after they'd gone.
So, Sherrie and Claudia, do you have plans to do a monument for the boys' pond?
We have the big picture.
We have a big painting. We have a big painting that Penny Barbin's daughter painted, and it's on the wall. But then I show it to people and I say, "But there's one thing wrong with this picture. What would you think it is?" And they can't think, and I'm like, they have on swimming suits, and the boys never wore swimming suits. But It's just a fun memory, and just a place that everybody hung out, and I'm sure everybody's got memories of being there in the irrigation ditches.
And like you say, Sherrie, that water was special. Whether it was in the ditch or the creek or wherever you could find it, it was special.
I remember Carl Brooks used to tell the story of how his mother would call him in when it would rain because she didn't want to waste the water on him.
Oh, that's good. Sherrie, tell us about, you were a St. George girl, but you were a Santa Clara girl. Tell us about the contrast there, or what it was like to to come to Santa Clara.
We were more the family that lived in St. George and would come over to visit on Sunday afternoons and visit with the family. I remember going to Paul's house, playing cards and different things like that. But I really remember, we didn't have air conditioning in our cars, and I remember going down through the halfway wash and how you could put your hand out the window and it would just, you could feel the difference in the temperature. It would just cool off. And then as you came into Santa Clara with all those trees and everything, you could just feel the difference, and it was so much cooler and so nice. And
now that's not there anymore. None of that. It's all just continuation. I remember Debbie saying that when she was growing up, they went to town once a week. In other words, on Saturday, they went from Santa Clara to St. George once a week. And you're nodding your head, Claudia. Stop and think about that. How many times do we go back and forth a day now and it's nothing? But then it was this long drive across the desert and down through the wonderful dip that was cooler. It's just a completely different.
Wasn't churches the first
church
in between?
Yeah. And it was separated. Now we're just all one big city. I was just thinking about how competitive people in Santa Clara were. And Paul's older brother, Jan, wrote a cutest little article about Wash Day in Santa Clara and how Laura Gubler, who never married, she would watch and she would go to visit different people and say, oh, well, so-and-so's already got their clothes on the line and so-and-so's, her sheets are the whitest, and just so competitive.
And it was Mondays.
And Monday was Wash Day.
Monday was Wash Day in Clary.
And I know Dad said they'd do sports and they'd do the south side against the north side and have competitions
Married
there.
And single.
Yeah, married and single. And there's lots of old traditions. I think we've started some new traditions. I think Swiss Days is a new tradition, and now it's dear to the hearts of our children and our grandchildren, and it's something that kind of brings together. And I think if our parents or grandparents had thought about it, they probably would have done it too. I know they used to do a May Day, even after they quit doing it in the school. I think it was our grandpa that started a May Day, and they did a cleanup day.
Yeah.
And so what you do is everybody in town would clean up for that day, and then in the afternoon, evening, we would meet up to the park and have hot dogs, and they would do some sports. I remember one year Bruce and I were in charge of it, and I think different people, I don't know if you remember May Days, but we did it for quite a few years, and then I think it just kind of fell off the grid. But Swiss Days is here to stay. It's been 35 years this year was our Swiss Days, and I think it's special because we pay tribute to our ancestors at it. It's not just a go to the booth and eat the food, but it's come and learn about your ancestors and pay tribute to them.
Claudia, I got to hear about night games.
Oh, that's a good one. Town Bell. I'm a girl. They would make us go hide and we wouldn't get to do anything. And the boys were the ones that would have the cowbell. And our job was to just hide in that barn and just stay there or born until we heard really, really hard. And we would either know that the other team caught our team or they were just trying to get us out to come out, and then they would tag us. So I did not know there were rules until Brad Hafen told me there were really rules for Town Bell. Did you ever play Town Bell?
Yeah, I did.
Do you know rules?
Yeah.
I didn't know there were rules.
Yeah.
I just knew go.
Sound like some of
And
your
stop.
rules were to hide you guys.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
So there were 2 teams, right?
Yep, there was 2 teams. Paul, tell me some rules because I didn't know there was any.
There's 2 teams, and the first team has the bell, and they usually started at the Relief Society building, and the second team started up on the corner by the church, so it's half a block away. And as soon as the bell was rung the first time, then you try to catch the bell, the second team. And back then, because we had Highway 91, the first rule was that we didn't cross the street because in the excitement of the chase, you might run out in front of a car.
So you had all of California and Salt Lake City and Denver coming both ways right through your little town.
And
But
so,
it expanded all the way down. I mean, it wasn't just one block.
oh, no, it was 2 blocks.
Yeah, it went, yes, but that seemed like forever when you're little.
When you're running.
And it would go from the main street to the boundaries would go from the main street to the ditch up at the foot of the hill. Mm-hmm. And I remember running more than once through some of those cow pastures and corrals up in
And
the
the
top of the
barns.
lots, and watching Earl Goobler, who I knew had the bell, just about 50 feet ahead of me. And I could see this row of cedar posts in the middle of this pasture, and I thought, I don't remember a fence being there. But he stopped and very carefully crossed over that fence. That was enough to slow me down, groping for that fence that I never found. And by then he was off and gone, and it was...
So to capture the bell, you had to tag him?
Tag the person that had it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there might have been some evolution of rules through the generations, but how far back would that go?
I don't know.
I mean, Randy played it. Randy and those guys did it. And I mean, he's 83 now.
Do you know if your parents played down bell or did that?
I don't.
I don't think, mine didn't.
They were probably
Working
home,
and home sleeping. Yeah.
resting from a
That's
long
right.
day.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Dad used to talk about taking the early bus home so he could get a jump on the farm work because he loved to work on the farm. And I think they all did that.
You can't talk about Santa Clara and childhood without talking about the ability to walk through the town of Santa Clara on a Sunday and be invited to all the homes that had made peach pies, homemade ice cream. It didn't matter who you were or where you were. As you were walking up, they would just invite you in.
Yeah.
And the smell of peaches throughout the whole town in the summer, I don't think I'll ever forget that. It was just, we had some of the best cooks.
Yes.
And it was just so fun because, growing up, I had 50 mothers. And if you ever did anything wrong, you were told, right? But of course, Gert would be the first one to tell you. But it didn't matter. You were invited to anybody's home. And I remember in the summer, we would get up, Mom would feed us breakfast, we might do a few little chores. We didn't have cows. We'd do a few little chores. And then we would say goodbye. And we wouldn't see her until the streetlights came on. If the streetlights came on, then she would be on your porch, and I would be hearing Claudia Ruth. And when she put that middle name in there, you knew you were in trouble to get home. But we would go out, and we would just be gone all day long. And then to eat lunch, there was 5 of us girls. They would either come to my house, or we would go to their house and have lunch. But we just stayed out all day long playing at the creek all the time. And you can't even do that now. Everybody is so worried and everybody's protected.
But also regimented with sports or class or music or whatever it might be. You don't have a whole day to just be out.
No.
That's amazing. So you're out all day and then you're out all night playing town bell. And
In the summer.
Would that, in the summer. How late would that go?
9 or,
10.
10 o'clock
News.
easy.
Because Dad watched the news and the weather report. I still watch the weather report. I have to have my daily fix and then go to bed. So we had to be home by bedtime.
Another fun tradition was the rodeo.
That's what I was thinking of.
Santa Clara Rodeo.
Santa Clara Rodeo, and we would always come over for the rodeo, and a lot of times we'd go over to Paul's house, and me and Carol or somebody would get on our horse there and ride up over the hill.
And that was on Thanksgiving Day every year. And the rodeo would start at 2 o'clock. And so you either had an early Thanksgiving dinner, but most generally probably later.
Actually, generally it was early.
We had ours in the morning,
because
noon.
my family was one of the families that provided stock. That really great bucking and roping stock, and we would, after we fed in the mornings, then we would gather up those that we were going to take to the rodeo grounds, drive them up to the rodeo grounds from our field, and put them in the corrals there. And then as soon as we were finished, we would go home and eat lunch, eat Thanksgiving dinner at 12 o'clock, be back to the rodeo at 2. And as soon as the rodeo was over, it was time to gather up those cattle, sort them out, and go feed again.
And was Landon Fry the only announcer that you can remember? He's the only one I know of. Okay.
To help our listeners know where that rodeo...
Right at the Santa Clara Park.
Or just north.
The old park, yeah. But it was larger than the
Spence Gun Park.
Baseball.
Yeah.
And we need to put a plaque there to tell about it. I've thought about that.
That's a good idea.
I've started the proceedings, but I start a lot of things. I don't get all of them done.
The ones you've gotten done are off the chart.
Thank you. It was just all red sand. Of course, the whole heights was just red sand and sagebrush. And I have some old home movies of the rodeo there, and they're really fun to watch. And there's pictures of Landon and Uncle Murr. And
Be fun to have a little reel of that in the museum, playing on a monitor. That one.
So let's talk just for a minute about that rodeo.
okay.
Many of the communities needed fundraisers to build a chapel or to have some kind of improvement. And I don't know how Santa Clara got Thanksgiving, but like Gunlock is the 4th of July. And they still do the rodeo on the 4th of July. And every town had their holiday.
Enterprise on the 24th.
Yeah.
And Vail in early August. And then Hurricane always had it during Peach Days. It was sort of every town had the franchise for that
It's true.
period.
Yeah. And Grandpa was bishop during that time.
When it started.
And he and VJ, and I'm not sure, between the two of them it happened. And that was the beginning of the fundraiser for the chapel. Were you blessed in the chapel that we've got there? So even though you lived in St. George?
Yeah, I was blessed in Santa Clara. Yep. Because Grandpa did it.
That's right.
There's so much we could talk about, but one of the things before we wind up here, I'd love to maybe have you think about some of the traditions or the things that you did in your families or that you did as children that would connect back to that Swiss heritage.
Oh, the first thing I think of right off is coloring Easter eggs.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
We still to this day
Yeah.
color Easter eggs the Swiss way, and we'd go out and dig the red root, which is a madder weed, and use that for your coloring. And you wrap the eggs with plants, flowers, weeds, whatever, and thread. Then put them in raw to boil in the red root, or we'd do a pan of red root and onion skins.
Ricky, have you ever done that? Did you ever do it before you met a Hafen?
I was going to say, I don't think I've ever missed a year. And even when we were on our mission, I did onion skins. So I think that's something. And I had years ago, I had 2 girls from Switzerland that just happened to drop into Santa Clara. And I took them over to Santa Clara to show them what we had. And there were some colored Easter eggs there. And I said, do you still color your Easter eggs this way? And she said, yes. And I said, well, where do you get the red root? And she says, oh, you can go to the store and buy them in bundles. I'm like, wow, wish we could do that. But that's really a tradition that stayed very, very strong in
But
Santa
with
Clara.
that comes the cracking of
Oh,
Easter eggs.
Yes, that's
Yes, but
best.
Victor Street.
yes.
And Mom just was really mad every time Dad would bring home 6 dozen eggs. We
The
had
winner
to eat.
got the egg of the opponent.
Oh, man. But I'm sorry, my dad cheated.
They all did, Claudia.
Did you guys too? He cheated because the way he held the egg, those poor kids they didn't even have a chance against him. And I think they still do it. I
They
know
do.
the fries have
They
gone
do.
up.
They would hold the egg in their palm with the top exposed, and then
Then the
they'd
other
pound
person-
from the top,
Yes.
and whichever egg broke, the one that didn't break was the winner.
Yes.
They still meet on Victor Street, Santa Clara Drive on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock.
And I know Dad would get some turkey eggs from his dad, from Ivan's, and apparently they're a little stronger. I wouldn't say that it was really cheating, but we just got way, way too many eggs. I mean, do you know how many egg salad sandwiches you have to have? Every day we were trying to eat those, or potato salad. It was like no more.
There were a lot of theories on how to get the advantage. One of them was to take eggshells and crush them up and put them in the chicken feed.
Aha.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a competition. This was not just a friendly little thing.
Yeah,
it was a big competition back then.
And there's the Christmas Eve program,
Yes.
and that's still going on today, and that was a really fun tradition.
They used to use the holidays as an excuse to get together. And I remember reading something recently about there were so many visitors in town, they decided to have an outing just to get together and honor the visitors. And it was people who had come home from school. They were away at school, and they were home for the Christmas holidays. And so 27th or 28th of December, they held a big party, a town party, just to say, it's good to see you. Come back again.
And the dance is up in the top of the school.
And all of this is still there. It's still palpable, in spite of the fact that when you were growing up there, was there maybe 200 people at most? 300 people. Now, President Paul Graf, you were stake president of the Santa Clara stake until it became 2 stakes, Santa Clara stake and the Santa Clara Heights stake. And how many wards now and how many thousand people in Santa Clara? I don't have those statistics in front of me. But this cohesive group of 300 people, and now 10, 12,000 maybe? Is it 8? Well,
but Sherrie,
it will soon be.
Yes, it will. Sherrie hit it on the head, though. Of those, how many have roots that connect back? And I'd bet she's right with her
It's
percentages.
surprising.
What is that percentage
I would say around 70 to 80%
that have roots?
that have roots. And you'd be surprised how many have roots with the missionaries that were already there before the Swiss. So
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of them that are drawn. So many are drawn to Santa Clara. But when people come in the museum, I show them. I have this little chart, and it starts in the 1800s, and then it goes. And Santa Clara was 290 in there to 320 probably for many, many years until about the 1970s. And then, it went to a couple of thousand, and then it went to 4 and 6 and 8. And I say, do you know what the difference was? And they'll think about it. And I said, air conditioning. Yeah. Nobody would ever come here. Everybody would think, why would you want to go to St. George? It's so hot. But we grew up with swamp coolers, and you had to sit right under it to be cooled off. But we survived, and we had screen doors that you opened the door and let the breeze in. And
So, yeah, one of the things, I don't know if you two are probably too young to remember, but the cars that used to come in off the desert and would
the bags
pull over in Santa Clara, they'd have those desert canvas bags
on the front.
And then they would have the water, the window air conditioner that would be kind of like a swamp cooler. But I mean, it's all mental. I don't think there was actually anything.
We didn't ever have those. We just rolled the windows down.
I know. Yeah. Well, that kind of helps you remember something else about the town, like Gates's Motor Court, and they had a gas station there and a restaurant and a shop where you could get your car fixed. And then as you came on into town, there were other places that you could stop. The Rocky Mountain Produce and the Santa Clara Merc and
Service station.
Ken Entz's place. Yeah. And
you worked there.
when I didn't work there. I hung out there.
You hung out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
My dad lived there.
a lot of us lived there. That's where you could get the coldest pop. There was always an ice cold, whatever you needed. And that's where I first met Craig Booth. And he was working there. I think he had just turned 16. And my recollection is that he was driving an old Plymouth. And I think it was a family car. And somehow he got to drive that because he had to drive to work. And
he had a long commute.
He did.
From St. George.
He did. There was nothing between Santa Clara and St. George. And I've thought a lot about that. How would Craig get that job? And I thought, there's got to be a connection with his mom and dad, because his dad did a lot of the service work on many of the Santa Clara vehicles that needed to go and get repaired. I know all of our vehicles in my family, that's where they would take them for repair work. And so I would guess that Craig's dad had a connection with the Santa Clara Dutchman, and when there was an opening, he took it and got Craig over there to work. And Craig didn't always like the Dutchman. He was always kind of candidly antagonistic.
He was just jealous.
But interesting, out of that relationship that I had with Craig, a lot of fun things developed. And one of them was our standing lunch date at Swiss Days. Every year at Swiss Days, we would meet for lunch, and he would show up in some of the dangest outfits. I mean, his red Dixie College shorts. But, I mean, I'd look at him and say, really, Maureen let you out of the house looking like that? And we always had conversations. In my day when I was county attorney, he always wanted to know the dirt, what was going on. And he would prime me a little bit. Later on, when I went to work for the Attorney General, I was doing federal prosecution work as well. And so I had some connections in Zion Park. You may understand that. And part of those connections were that if I ever wanted to go hike the subway, all I had to do is tell one of the rangers, and they would call me and tell me what time to be there. And it was awesome because I took my family on a subway hike every year. And Craig found out about that. And hiking the subway with Craig Booth is a whole different experience. I had never heard the full text of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream until I hiked the subway with Craig Booth. And there were a couple of places that every year you can plan on it. When you go down through with Craig, he would find this high rock, stand up on it with his staff, and look like Moses waving that staff, quoting, I have a dream. And
that is awesome.
he was quite a guy. He was a lot of fun to be with and enjoyable.
Well, those days of having a connection to hike the subway are long gone, as we all know.
Yeah.
And I've always blamed Craig for being the one who caused that, because before there was social media, somehow through Craig it went viral to everybody you can imagine, and that's when that really started. But it sounds like it goes back
further,
even further to you, Paul.
He told me once that he had been in the subway during every month of the year except one. And I'm trying to remember whether it was February or March, but either one I can understand. It would have been dang cold.
And some of those are pretty dangerous times to be there, too.
Yeah.
That is awesome. As you talked about that standing lunch date at Swiss Days, it reminds me of I had a standing breakfast with him at rodeo time when the bulls arrived. We'd go meet down and look at the bulls, and that didn't happen too many times, but it was a pretty special time. What a great fellow. What a great thread to tie through all of this.
He's the doctor that delivered all three of my kids, okay? And now having him as a doctor, that's another whole story. Because if you go in with the problem, he goes, oh, Clary girls get this. So he would never really tell me what I was supposed to do and what was wrong. But every time you saw him, now Craig was to every funeral, he was to every wedding, any happening in town, Craig was there. And it didn't matter. He didn't just say this once. Every single time I would say, "Hi, Craig," he'd go, "Oh, I didn't recognize you with your clothes on." Because he was my doctor. And I mean, I got that over and over and over again. So there would be times that I would walk the way around so that I didn't have to say hi to him. Depended on who I was with.
So Dr. Staley, of course, was our doctor because cousin. And he was a partner to Craig. And I think he had given Craig strict instructions not to come to the child deliveries. But Dr. Staley was a little slow getting there for one of my kids, and Craig showed up, and he delivered. And Kathy was really excited to get it over with, so let it happen, you know. And we were not going to wait for Dr. Staley, but he was not a happy camper when he showed up and found out Craig had been there and got the deliveries. You can edit that part out.
I can tell you now, that's going to stay. Wow. I mean, you think of Craig and you think of Santa Clara, and Sherrie and I and Craig all grew up here in town, but we were jealous. We were jealous of what you had, and that idyllic growing up that you had is pretty special. And I know, Sherrie, you got to experience that intimately. Before we have to wrap up here, are there any other thoughts or things you'd like to share?
One other tradition, and I'll start it, but they'll have to finish it, is Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
And
yes.
so tell about Halloween in Santa Clara.
First and only time I ever wore high heels. And I got 2 houses from my house early in the evening and thought, this is stupid. But there are certain houses you want to be sure and go to. And, for example, Vella Ruth Hafen. She always made puffed rice balls, which is my favorite. And I always had to go there to make sure that I got one of her puffed rice balls.
And we had to go to your mom's house for her donuts.
Yeah.
Yes, Wanda, we got the apples.
There you go.
But you would dress up, and it wasn't just you would come to the door and say trick or treat. Oh, no, you come into the house, and then they have to guess who you are. And it was a big deal. So Mom would put all of us kids in the car, drive us up by Grant Hafen's house so we could be walking in this direction so people wouldn't see us leaving our house in our costumes. And because Mom worked in the primary, everybody that came in, she knew exactly who they were.
I think all the adults knew exactly who we were.
Exactly.
And I think they just had a lot of fun watching us get excited when we couldn't guess.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And then if you were in a group and you were the last one guessed, it was like heaven.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Claudia, I'm turning to you at this one because before we end here, we can't end without whoever that was that drove a Cadillac through town on Christmas Eve or late Christmas night or Christmas morning.
As in Uncle? Yes, Uncle Reuben. Yes. He was the real one. He was totally the real Santa. But I remember going to Mom and saying, wait a minute, he drove here in a car. Of course, you had the big story that he had to put his reindeer at somebody's barn and, the whole bit. But we got, every Christmas morning, those bells were just a jingling.
So it was early Christmas morning.
It was early Christmas morning, like we were still in bed asleep.
4 or 5 o'clock.
Oh, it didn't matter. Yeah, because he had so many he had to go to.
Yeah.
Tell us who this was.
It was Reuben Ent. And then didn't Mel do it later on? I was thinking...
I don't know.
Jay did it later on.
Jay did it later on.
And
His
then
son,
Clark
Jay.
tried it.
See, he used to go to Aunt Afton, Afton Ances, and because they were Ances too, and I was always so jealous. Why does Santa Claus come to their house and doesn't come to our house,
Not that it mattered, but my dad used to have a bag of dried fruit for him when he left.
So he came to your house too? He always
yeah.
came to your house.
Well, see, that was it. You never gave him a prize.
We got him every year.
Yeah, but
and
I think he...
And Debbie speaks fondly, but also I think it might have been a little traumatic when she was younger, because she said he'd come right down the hallway into their bedroom.
Yeah.
Yes, he would.
Yeah.
I mean, Mom and Dad would still be in bed asleep. I mean, he would just, because, we never locked our doors.
Yeah.
And he would just come in and shake in the bells, and he would get us all up.
So I know every town has its stories, but where else would you find Reuben Entz? And was it a Cadillac that he drove? That was my understanding.
It was, I don't know exactly, but it was big.
That's too young to be.
He would show, well, Debbie always thought of it as a Cadillac, and he would drive up and come in your house. And it's true, nowadays that doesn't quite work, but at that time, in that little town, and with the spirit and the faith and the joy that was there, Reuben Entz could be Santa Claus to the town.
It was obvious that he was friends with my parents, and so I knew he could be my friend, and he was awesome. He
was
focused
the real deal.
each one of us. And later, when Jay picked up the reins, if you will, his voice was too high. His laugh was... his giggle was too high.
Too obvious.
And you were older.
But Reuben also had... that's true. Reuben also had his helper, and she was right there with him. And she probably was the driver.
And that was
Maida.
Maida. Wonderful.
Good people.
Yeah.
Good stock.
I don't want this to end. I wish we could just keep going. I'm hoping that you will all commit to do this again sometime, because I know as soon as you leave, you're going to be thinking, gosh, we could have talked about this. We could have talked about that. And we can and we will do it again. But for now, I just want to say thank you. And on behalf of all of our listeners, because this is such a delight. What a wonderful thing to get to hear the three of you reminisce about a place and a life that's so special. And I want to thank you for representing all of those Clary kids in such a beautiful way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. The hot winds whirl around me and take away my breath. I've had the chills and fever till I'm nearly but I know that there are others who will come here after me. Though I may never see it as a garden lined with trees, if this desert's gonna blossom, I'd bet